Hey, hi everybody. I hope this finds you well. I want to make sure that I'm live. Hi. I think you can hear me and see me okay, hopefully. I'm going to double check on my phone. I hope you guys are having a great Sunday. I know I am. But today I wanted to go live to talk about 10 mistakes to avoid during your scouting trip. If you've been on my channel before, you know that I always recommend you take a scouting trip before you actually move to your destination. So in this channel, we are focusing on Africa. So moving to the motherland, and definitely something that I recommend you do. Go on a scouting trip and avoid the mistakes that we're going to be talking about today. So if you're joining me live, say hi. If you are watching this on the replay, just let me know as well, and I'll come back and greet you. But let's go into these points, okay? Let's go into those 10 mistakes. Um, I went last year, we went on our scouting trip to Ivory Coast, to Cote d'Ivoire, and we were there for 10 days. I was there for 10 days, my husband a little less, and we're going on our scouting trip to Cameroon soon. So that's something that, even though I had been to Cote d'Ivoire before, I it was very important for me to see and experience Cote d'Ivoire from a different lens. So I had been there before, but I was like, it was there for my friend's wedding. It wasn't there on with the perspective of, okay, I might move here. So my the way I was looking at things from the perspective was different. So it was important for me to go again, but this time with a different perspective, with the perspective and the lens of, okay, can I move here? Can I see myself and my family living here? So that was one of the reasons why it was so important for me to go again. Okay, so let's get into those 10 mistakes. They are not in any particular order, and let's go. All right, number one mistake to avoid when you are going on a scouting trip is to stay at a hotel. Um, Staying at a hotel, the experience of being in a hotel and experience of being in an Airbnb or somebody is going to be totally different. So staying in a hotel is definitely a tourist ambiance, a tourist experience. And while staying in an Airbnb or at somebody's house is more like, okay, I'm living there. I am part of a community. I'm part of a neighborhood. I can go and buy some oranges on the corner store, or I'm not just with foreigners, which is the case at the hotel. You're just there with visitors and not really with people who are living their everyday life in that city. Okay. So number one, staying at a hotel, if you can avoid it, I highly recommend you pick the option of an Airbnb or staying with a host family or something like that. Okay. So that was mistake number one. Mistake number two is similar to what I just said and actually mentioned it earlier, is not stopping and being. What do I mean by that? I mean that you need to take the time of really stopping and saying, okay, can I see myself living here? Can I see myself? Uh, can this place feel like home? Can I make it home for me instead of just observing everything from the perspective of, okay, I'm here and then I'm out, right? But really looking at, can I see this place as a potential home, and can I make it a home, even if it's not a potential home now? Can I make it home? So that was a very important question that I asked myself through the trip, because yes, we did a touristy thing and stayed at the beach and all of that, which realistically is not something that you're going to do every day when you move to a new place, unless you're moving like to a beach house, something like that. But my point is that through everything that I was doing, whether it was taking a Yango, which is an Uber, whether it was going to the grocery store, whether it was, I don't know, or getting some food or eating at a restaurant, I always try to look at it as, okay, is that something that I can see myself doing here? And something that would that be an experience that I would enjoy? Getting in traffic, really, really heavy traffic, is that something that I would be okay experiencing, or would that be a deal breaker for me? Okay, so really stopping and understanding this experience, and if this is something that you can get used to it. Okay, so that was number two. Number three, this is a mistake that, I mean, 90% of us make. it defeats the purpose of it all. The scouting trip is, in essence, you want to call it a scouting trip, exploratory trip, recon trip. There's a goal, there's a purpose for that trip. Okay, so mistake number three is if you don't have a plan, if you're just going there to look or without any kind of purpose. Okay, you need to be aware of what you're going to do and the things that are important to you, the things that you have to explore, the things that you have to inquire about. Maybe it's the school for the kids, maybe it's networking, whatever it is for you. You have to be clear about what it is before you actually go. I had a long list of things that I needed to do there. Obviously, I didn't do all these things, but I had a plan. I knew that, okay, these are important, these are important, these are important. And then I had to be flexible and say, okay, well, since I cannot do this, this, and that, what is the next most important thing that I can still do? And that's how I operated during our scouting trip. I still had focus and I still had a goal that I had to accomplish. And even though there are a lot of things that I wanted to do that I didn't get to do, like going to Yamoussoukro, for example, it was a big bummer because that was a big highlight of the trip. It would have been a big highlight for the trip, but I couldn't make it. So the next best thing to do was actually other things, but I was still able to do something else, and it was still worth it. Okay, so that's that's because I had a plan. I had a list of things that I had to do that I wanted to do, and then I had, if I couldn't make some of them, I had an alternative to that. Okay, so having a list of what you want to do and what the plan is for you. That's number three. Number four is networking. So if you don't network, that's a big mistake. And that goes back to what are you going to do there once you move to that destination? Is it that you're going to have a job there? Is it that you're going to run a business? What is your industry? What industry are you going to be in, working in at that destination? Whether you're working remotely or maybe you have your own business, but you will need to interact with certain people, with other professionals. So, what is that industry? And you need to be able to look into that already during your scouting trip. Maybe you have an NGO, so maybe you're going into orphanages. That might be your networking. It doesn't have to be professional in the sense of, okay, this is business oriented and for profit. It could be an NGO, for example. That could be your thing. Maybe it could be networking with charities and getting a sense of the needs. Maybe it's more in the political environment. Maybe it's more on the startup environment, whatever it is, whatever industry it is, maybe it's a medical field, you need to be able to network in that arena already during your scouting trip to get a sense of, okay, if this is an environment that is where that industry is bubbling, where that industry is existing, where that industry is, what kind of regulations do they have there? Is it something that's going to be a problem for you? Yes or no. So you have to understand those things during your scanning trip. So number four, no networking is a big mistake that you should avoid. Number five is not asking the right questions. And those right questions might be difficult questions to ask, but they're very important to ask regardless. These could be related to crime, the crime rate. These could be relationship with the police, for example. These could be racism. Depending on where you're going, these will be important questions for you to address when it comes to crime, when it comes to safety, when it comes to things like that, the political, um how do I say that, the political atmosphere of of the country right now, or the region where you're thinking of going. Is it a stable government? Is it a democratic government? Is it what, like, even like the current currency, is it a stable currency? What if something crashes? What if there's a coup, something like that? Is there an American embassy there? How, all of these things are hard questions that you might not think of asking because you don't want to think of the negative and the worst thing that could happen. But these are things that you need to understand and ask. If there's, in case of evacuation, what would be the emergency plan? Would the embassy come and get you? Would is there a hospital there with the right kind of care that you need right now that you might need? Okay, so these are very crucial questions that you need to ask yourself. So on your scouting trip, make sure you get answers to those right questions. Okay, so that was number 5. Number 6 is only doing touristy things. Like I said earlier, a scouting trip is not just a tourist trip where you just go there as a tourist to visit and then come back home. You're going there with a purpose, and you're going there to see yourself as a resident. You're not going to see yourself as a tourist, but as a resident. That means that you're going to do things that residents do. Obviously, you're going to do some touristy things because you're coming there maybe for the first time, or maybe you're a repeat visitor. But and just because it's part of the fun, okay, there are things that you want to discover. And even as a local, as a resident, even where you are right now, you do quote unquote touristy things. Like in Houston, I went to the NASA. So yeah, that's kind of a touristy thing to do. Like all visitors who come to Houston will go to NASA. But I did it as a resident. Same thing. Okay. For you, you would go and do touristy things that other residents would do as well. But don't spend your whole scouting trip just doing touristy things. Otherwise, you're missing the point of seeing yourself as a resident there. So sure, do touristy things, but don't just focus on that. Do a few because you're there, but it shouldn't be something that you do every single day and only that. Okay, so that's the 6th mistake to avoid, only doing touristy things. Number 7, this is going to be important for you because you're thinking of moving as a family. So I always recommend that you go with your spouse or your partner. And I'm glad we did that because initially it wasn't the plan. We didn't, I thought it was just going to be me going. But I'm really glad that my husband came with me because we saw things differently and things that were maybe deal breaker for me. And he was like, oh, yeah, this is no big deal. This is cool. Or things that were deal breakers for him. I was like, oh, this is cool for me. Right. So having that perspective of two people there is going to really, really help, mostly if you're going as a family. So maybe you can bring the kids. For me, small kids at the age of my kids, it doesn't really make sense for me to bring them on a scouting trip because they're not at an age where their decision is as, I'm not going to say important. It's important, but they're not as aware of the whole thing yet, okay? Because they're still young. So their input or their decision making is not as um, important. It's important, but that's not the right word. I shouldn't say important. It's not as crucial as the input and the decision making of the parents, me and my husband. Okay, so going with your spouse is going to help a lot. You don't have to, but if you can, that's something that I recommend, mostly if it's a destination that not of you have gone to and where maybe somebody, one of you, the two of you is skeptical, where isn't sure and needs more reassurance, then obviously a scouting trip would be a great way to get the answers to the questions that you have or the doubts that you have, or reinforce certain ideas that you already have. So going with your spouse, that's a great thing to do. And not doing it is a mistake to avoid. All right, let's go into number 8. Number 8 was very, very important because this is something that you would usually research online and you might not always get the right information. So, mistake number 8 to avoid is not working on a realistic budget once you're there. We can all do the research online, and there are a lot of websites online that will tell you the cost of living in different places around the world. But they don't always take into consideration your own family dynamics. So the fact that it's two parents and then 4 kids or 3 kids, or it's usually solo budget or maybe a family of 4, like 2 parents, 2 kids. Okay, so if you have more kids, then okay, how do you make that work? So the information is good that's out there, but it's not always super accurate. So the fact that you are on the ground, you can look at your budget and then have a more realistic idea of, okay, this costs this. So obviously per month we're going to spend this because we're a family of 4 or family of 6, family of 10, whatever it is, right? So looking at the stores and looking at the prices, going to the market and looking at the prices, going to restaurants and looking at the menus and looking at, okay, Well, if we were to eat, let's say once a week, eat out once a week as a family, how much would it cost us to get like entree and appetizers and drinks? Like in a lot of places, um, appetite. I mean, in a lot of places, like sides are not included in the meal. Okay, in the U.S., usually we have the sides with the meal; it's part of the meal, and the drinks might not be as. Sometimes the drinks are included, sometimes they're not. So take all these things into consideration and make your whole all the calculations that you need to do, and then put together your budget. Talking about budget, I have a free budget checklist, so you can find it in the description of this video or on the channel, so on my about page. And this is basically a checklist of all the different items that I have in my budget, and that, to give you an idea of the things maybe that you might forget, like getting insurance, life insurance, getting, you know, um, staff, like if you want to pay for a nanny, if you want to pay for a driver, things like that, paying for Google Fi, paying for the internet cable, your VPN might be something that you might forget. But so I have included all these different items on the budget. So if you want to get that, make sure you look in the description of this video or on the channel on the about section. Okay. So not working on a realistic budget is going to be a terrible surprise, a bad surprise for you, because that's the point of you being there. You want to get as realistic of a budget as possible. You want to know how your life is going to be like there as a resident. And this is where, realistically, as a foreigner, you are going to want things that are imported. In a lot of cases, those are very expensive. Like, let's say Oreos, right? So take that into consideration when you're looking at your budget. And I've done a lot of videos, a lot of vlogs about my trip to Abidjan. And I went to the store, I went to the market, the open market, and I went to the supermarket, and looking at, okay, what would be some things that my family is more likely to eat? Let's say certain brand of cookies or certain kind of cereal, and things that we would buy like fresh fruits and vegetable in the market. Okay, how much does that cost? Okay, I'm including that in my budget. Asking my friend as well, how much does she spend on this? Or realistically, how much is gas costing her every single week? How many cars does she have? All these things are great to know. Like, I mean, gas prices, like even here within the US, prices in Texas are different from prices in New York, right? So same thing, prices here in the US are going to be different from prices at your destination. So scouting that, making sure that you take that into consideration, is going to be very, very important. What kind of car are you going to be driving? So that will determine how much you're going to pay for gas as well. So always think about these things and put that into your budget. So that's a mistake to avoid, not working on a realistic budget during your trip. Take notes, take videos, get that information, because this is the best information you can get. It's you on the ground getting real numbers. It's not somebody online who just told you some number and they don't really know your family dynamic and all of that. So that's mistake number 8. Mistake number 9 is not being aware of the local perception of Americans. This is something that a lot of Americans ignore or take for granted, or I don't know how to say it, but it's like a lot of people outside of the US don't like Americans. Let me just say it that way, right? And for a lot of Americans, it's hard to believe. It's hard to to know, because a lot of Americans don't know what's going on outside of the US. That's just the reality. Like, you rarely see news from outside of the US unless it's like, okay, the war in Ukraine, or the earthquake in Turkey, because those were like big, big, big events, or still are big events. But you will not know about the politics in France. You will not know about the politics in any country in Africa. That's just how American media is. On the other hand, places outside of the US get news about what is happening in the US and what is happening around the world. Okay. So a lot of Americans are not aware of the perception that people have about them. So when you pick your destination, it's very important to know what is that sentiment, what is that I'm not saying that everybody's going to have to love you or everybody's going to hate you. I'm just saying that it's very important to understand the relationship, the political relationship between that country and the US. One way to do that is looking at the embassy, their presence of an embassy there, maybe a consulate as well. Where are those relationships? What kind of treaties do they have? Is there, that sentiment, that anti-American sentiment in that place? So that's something that you have to be aware of. Again, that's a very hard question to ask yourself, but very, very important because you don't want to find yourself, after moving there and then hating the place because you don't feel like people actually like you or enjoy you being there and they just want you out. Okay, so you want to be aware of these things, and there's a lot of research that you have to do about the relationship, political, economical relationship between that country and the US. Okay, so that was mistake number 9 to avoid. Last but certainly not least, because there are other mistakes that you can make, but for the sake of this video, I just came up with 10 of these mistakes. So the last one is to rely on others to do everything for you. It goes back to the same idea. The scouting trip is for you to see yourself as a resident. How would your life be like there? So you're not going there in tourist mode where you have a tour guide, where you have somebody cook all your meals, somebody make your beds, somebody drive you everywhere. Like you are there. So there are a lot of things that you're going to have to do for yourself, whether it's to call a cab, whether it's to go and find a place and have your Google Maps on your phone. Being self-reliant, that's what you want to be able to experience. I'm not saying that you have to put yourself in the middle of the jungle and then just find your way home, but trying to be as independent as possible. Of course people are going to help you. Of course there are things that you cannot do by yourself, just like any kind of service that other people do for residents and all of that. But you want to be able to be self-reliant. That way you can see how your life is going to be like once you're there and those people are not there anymore. There's no more valet, there's no more, oh, let me book the tour for you, let me show you this place and that place, right? It's just going to be you once you move there. So you want to be able to have that experience once you are on your scouting trip. Okay, so these were the 10 mistakes to avoid on your scouting trip to the continent. Let's recap all 10 of them, shall we? Okay, no particular order. Mistake number 1 is staying at a hotel. Mistake number 2 is not stopping and being and seeing if you can make this place your home. Mistake number 3 is having no plan. Mistake number 4 is no networking. Mistake number 5 is not asking the hard but right questions. Mistake number 6 is only doing touristy things. If you're only doing touristy things, big mistake. Mistake number 7 is not going with your spouse or partner. Mistake number 8 is not working on a realistic budget once you're there. Mistake number 9 is not being aware of the local perception of Americans. And mistake number 10 is relying on others to do everything for you. All right, there you have it. Now I want to hear back from you. Let me know which one of those stood out for you. Which one of those was like, oh, wow, I didn't think of that. I'm going to make sure that I don't make this mistake. If you've gone on your scouting trip, let me know. How was it? How was your recon trip? Did you make any of these mistakes? And it's okay if you did, okay? That's part of the learning experience. One thing that, like I said earlier, like at first I was going to go by myself, but then it was great that my husband came with me. I did a lot of networking. I had a really, really detailed plan, and I had my eyes and lens looking at, okay, can I see myself here? Can I see myself, my kids living here? We didn't stay at a hotel. We stayed with a friend. The budget thing, I was trying as much as possible to get good numbers of daily things, of looking at menu prices and trying to go to just regular restaurants to see if the pricing was, to compare the pricing between the regular restaurants and the more not high end. We didn't go into a high end restaurant, but like more mid level restaurant, and just to get an idea of how the budget would fluctuate for us. Okay, so look at that list, go back through all 10 mistakes, and make your own list. Make your own list of the things that you're going to avoid making, the mistakes you're going to avoid making on your scouting trip. Okay, so any questions you may have, feel free to post them in the comments. I can wait to read all of your comments. And yeah, I wish you a fantastic end of the weekend. Thank you for watching this video. I will see you guys on the next one. Bye.